The Marina was still sleeping when I walked down the weathered dock that morning, coffee in one hand, toolbox in the other. The water was flat as glass, the sky bruised with the last shades of night, and my old fishing boat, the Harmony, rocked gently in her slip like she was breathing. I'd owned her for 12 years. She was a little sun-bleached now, but I'd kept her in better shape than most of the 40-odd vessels moored here. I didn't know yet that this was the last quiet morning I'd have for a long time. By the time I got home, there was an envelope waiting in my mailbox. Thick paper, official seal of Lakeside Estates, stamped in deep green, the kind of mail that never contains good news. I almost tossed it on the counter for later, but the weight of it caught my attention. Heavier than a bill. Too deliberate to be junk. I slid it open at the kitchen table, steam from my coffee curling into the cold air. Dear Mr. Harris, it has come to the attention of the HOA board that your vessel is in violation of our community's aesthetic standards. You are required to remove it within 28 days to avoid enforcement measures. I read the paragraph twice, then a third time. The words didn't rearrange themselves into anything sane. Aesthetic standards? I looked through the blinds toward the marina. 40 other boats in view, some twice the size of mine, some in visible disrepair. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a shot fired. The name at the bottom was one I knew too well. Angela Brooks, president. Angela had been here 3 years, but she'd made her presence known from the day she arrived. Always immaculately dressed, hair fixed even for a walk to the mailbox, voice dipped in politeness but sharpened underneath. The kind of person who could make good morning sound like a reprimand. I set the letter down, took another sip of coffee, and felt my pulse quicken. That afternoon, I headed back to the marina, not for maintenance this time, but for reconnaissance. The docks smelled of salt and cedar, ropes creaked in their cleats, and a couple of retirees were already loading coolers for a day of fishing. Nothing about the place looked different, except for Angela herself standing near the office like she was waiting for me. She smiled, the kind of smile that comes with terms and conditions. Mr. Harris, I trust you received our letter. Her tone was warm enough to pass inspection, but her eyes told the truth. This wasn't a question. I did, I said, though I'm curious. What's the actual problem with my boat? She made a vague, sweeping gesture toward the Harmony. It's quite large, and some residents feel it disrupts the visual harmony of the marina. I looked around at the others. The 40-foot cabin cruiser with peeling paint, the pontoon half covered in mildew. Interesting standard you've got, I said. Mind showing me where it's written down? Angela's smile thinned. Mr. Harris, the spirit of our guidelines matters more than the letter. We have to protect property values. I'd heard this kind of line before, a way to dress up personal bias in the robes of community interest. But what really caught my ear was that word, spirit, not rules. Then perhaps, I said evenly, you should make that spirit a little clearer before trying to enforce it. Her gaze cooled. We'd appreciate your cooperation. It would make things smoother. The word smoother hung there, heavier than the morning fog. When I got home, I didn't pull my boots off. I went straight to the office, fired up my old desktop, and logged into the county's property record system. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was looking for context. Who really owned what here? It didn't take long for something to jump out at me. The marina, the very slip they were threatening to take from me, wasn't listed under the HOA's name at all. According to the county, it belonged to a private company, Coastal Properties LLC, incorporated just 2 years ago. Angela had been president for 3. The date nagged at me like a splinter. Too close to be coincidence. I leaned back, stared at the ceiling, and let the thought settle in. If the HOA didn't own the marina, what authority did they have over my boat? And more importantly, who was really behind Coastal Properties? Outside, the lake was turning to gold under the setting sun. On the surface, it looked as peaceful as ever. But I've been around long enough to know that still water can hide dangerous currents. And something about this letter felt like the first pull of a riptide. That night, I dug deeper. The more I looked, the more the pieces refused to fit. HOA newsletters talked about investments in our marina, yet the budgets didn't line up. Annual dues had gone up, supposedly for dock repairs, but the county had no record of permits for any such work. By midnight, I had a spreadsheet of every inconsistency I could find. Nothing conclusive yet, but enough to smell a story. I shut the laptop, poured a whiskey, and stepped out onto the porch. From here, I could see the faint outline of the Harmony down at the dock, tied fast against the dark water. 28 days. That's how long they'd given me. 28 days to move my boat, or to find out who exactly thought they could push me off my own dock, and why. If they wanted smooth, they'd picked the wrong GUY.BY morning. My 28-day countdown had ticked to 27, and I already felt the clock in the back of my skull. The letter had gone from sitting on my counter to lying in the middle of my desk, staring at me like a challenge. I knew better than to go swinging blindly at an HOA board. That's a good way to end up neck-deep in fines and lawsuits. But I also knew the quickest way to make someone overplay their hand was to let them think they had the upper one. So I went about my day. At least, that's what it looked like. The Marina office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and salt air when I walked in. Behind the counter, a man in his 70s hunched over a ledger with the kind of quiet intensity that comes from decades of balancing other people's books. His name tag read Jim Patterson. "Morning," I said, leaning casually on the counter. Jim looked up like I'd interrupted a confession. "Morning. You hear about your slip fees?" Something like that. I smiled. "Quick question. Who handles the actual dock repairs here? County?" "Why?" His pencil froze mid-scratch. HOA contracts it out. Always has. "What?" I shrugged like it was idle curiosity. Just wondering why the county doesn't have any repair permits on file for the last 2 years. Jim's eyes flicked toward the back office door, closed, but humming faintly with the sound of a printer. "Best not to go asking too many questions," he muttered, which, of course, told me I was asking exactly the right ones. That afternoon, I tried the softer route, neighborly conversation. Mary Williams, 2 doors down, was outside clipping her rose bushes. Retired schoolteacher, sharp as a tack, and the unofficial welcome committee for new residents. "You hear about the letter?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Her clippers snipped twice before she answered. "Word gets around. Angela's been tightening things." "Tightening?" Mary glanced toward the marina, as if the pilings themselves might be wired for sound. "Last month, she tried to ban decorative garden sculptures. Said they disrupted visual continuity. Year before that, she started pushing new landscaping rules. People grumble, but they pay. Nobody wants to fight. And you?" "I like my roses just fine." "Thank you," she said, snipping again. But her eyes met mine, and there was more steel there than in the pruning shears. If someone pushed back, though, they wouldn't be pushing alone. By day's end, I had a rough sketch of the social terrain. Angela had her loyalists, folks who owed her favors or feared her reach, but most were just tired. Tired enough to stay quiet. And that's how power calcifies, not through unanimous support, but through the silence of those who think they're alone. The trick was to show them they weren't. 2 days later, the second letter arrived. This one didn't bother with fake warmth. "Mr. Harris, your lack of compliance is noted. Fines of $500 per day will commence on day 30 if the vessel is not removed. Documentation enclosed." The documentation was a series of glossy, wide-angle photographs that made the Harmony look like a cruise liner looming over the dock. Someone had even waited for low light to cast long shadows, giving her the presence of an uninvited warship. I turned one photo sideways and actually laughed. Whoever had taken these knew how to manipulate perspective, but not enough to hide the fact they'd been on private docks, snapping shots without permission. That wasn't enforcement. That was surveillance. And I don't like being watched. I decided to test the perimeter. Late the next evening, I walked the edge of the marina where it met the tree line. No HOA, no private property notices. Just generic marina markers, the kind you'd see at a public lake access point. I followed the dock around to its farthest finger, with a lamplight from shore barely reached. In the quiet, with only the slap of water against hulls, I studied the pilings. They were solid enough, but older than I'd thought. Some showed where the wood met the tide line, and one cleat wobbled under my boot when I tested it. A thought crept in, uninvited but welcome. If someone were to call in a safety inspection here, it wouldn't be the HOA they'd be talking to. It'd be the county. The seed of a plan planted itself right there in the dark. But before I could move on it, I needed to know exactly who I was up against. Back at home, I dug deeper into Coastal Properties LLC. It wasn't much on paper. A registered address in Gainesville, a filing date 2 years old, and a single listed owner, Hannah Brooks. Brooks, Angela's last name. If there was any doubt before, it was gone now. The president of our HOA had been writing letters about protecting property values, while the property in question was owned by her daughter. And Coastal Properties wasn't just holding our marina. A quick cross-check of county records showed Hannah owned parcels in 3 other HOA communities within 50 miles, all recreational facilities, all acquired within 18 months of each other. Patterns don't lie. I didn't confront Angela right away. Letting someone know you've caught them is a good way to make them hide the rest of the trail. Instead, I started keeping a low profile. I still waved when I passed her on the street, still paid my dues on time, still tinkered with the harmony like nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, I called in favors. A buddy in marine contracting sent me scanned copies of archived planning documents for Lakeside Estates. Another contact at the county clerk's office promised to flag any permit applications tied to Coastal Properties. I was building a net. All I needed was for Angela to swim a little farther into it. The break came sooner than expected. One rainy Wednesday, Jim from the Marina called me, voice low, like he was afraid the phone line might bite him. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, "but Angela just asked for quotes on exclusive access membership packages. Sounds like she's planning to start charging residents for slips, even the ones who've had them for years." "Membership packages," I repeated. "She's selling the water we already live on," he muttered. "And she's using your boat as the excuse to clean up the image." When I hung up, my hands were already on the keyboard, pulling up those planning documents. Somewhere in those 30-year-old blueprints, I hoped there was something, anything, that could make this whole thing unravel. And if there wasn't, well, I still had 24 days left. It was close to midnight when I finally found it. The scanned planning document flickered on my screen, the PDF grainy from years in a storage box somewhere at the county archives. My eyes were tired, but one line of faded type snapped me upright. 20-foot public access easement. Lake Harmony, recorded 1992. It cut straight through what was now the marina. I stared at it for a long moment, letting the weight settle. An easement meant that no matter who owned the marina, HOA, private company, or the Queen of England, nobody could restrict community access to the lake. Not legally, not entirely, which meant Angela's threats weren't just empty. They were illegal. I leaned back, heart pounding, the rain tapping against the window like it was keeping count of my options. The next morning, the lake was wrapped in fog, the docks barely visible. I walked down with my thermos of coffee, trying to see it with fresh eyes. The access path, the one I'd walked 100 times without thinking, lined up perfectly with the easement description. I imagined yellow caution tape across the gangways. "Do not enter" signs posted under the authority of county inspection. In my head, I could already hear the frustrated calls, the questions, the cracks forming in Angela's support. But that vision came with a shadow. If I pushed this button, there was no pulling it back. The people who had been polite or distant up until now might turn on me. Lawsuits were still a possibility. And Angela? She wouldn't just be angry. She'd be dangerous. That afternoon, the danger came knocking. Literally. Angela stood on my porch, clipboard in hand, rainwater dripping from the brim of her immaculate straw sun hat. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mr. Harris, we need to come to an understanding," she said. "This back and forth is getting us nowhere." I opened the door just enough to lean against the frame. "I'm listening." Her tone softened, but her eyes didn't. "If you move the boat quietly, there won't be any fines. We'll consider the matter resolved, and there won't be unpleasantness." "Unpleasantness," I repeated. She shrugged like it was a harmless word. "You've been a resident a long time. I'd hate for your reputation to change." The threat was so thinly veiled it might as well have been written in neon. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable, then said, "Tell me, Angela, is this about the boat, or is this about Coastal Properties?" The twitch in her jaw was worth every second of the conversation. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, turning to leave. And just like that, I knew I'd hit a nerve deep enough to bleed. I didn't wait another day. Using my marine contractor's license, I filed an emergency dock safety inspection request with the county. I cited structural integrity concerns and potential liability risks for public use. County regulations gave me the authority to conduct a 48-hour restricted access review, during which no boats could enter or exit the slips. The request was approved in less than 24 hours. That's when the real nerves kicked in, because now this wasn't just about saving my boat, it was about cutting off the lifeblood of the entire marina. And everyone would know I was the one holding the scissors. Saturday morning dawned bright and windless, the kind of day boat owners dream about. I was on the dock by 6 a.m., armed with official signage, laminated inspection notices, and a roll of industrial-grade yellow caution tape. Within 2 hours, the marina looked like a crime scene. Restricted access, county safety inspection in progress, hung from every gate and gangway. The slips were empty of movement, the hum of engines replaced by the distant sound of kids playing on shore. The first phone calls to Angela must have started before I'd even finished the second roll of tape. By 9, she was striding toward me in heels that clicked against the dock like a metronome of fury. "You can't do this," she said. "I can't," I said, handing her a copy of the permit. "And I am." She scanned the document, color rising in her cheeks. "This is a gross overreach. It's a safety inspection. Surely you, of all people, want to ensure our marina meets proper standards." I could almost hear her teeth grinding as she spun on her heel and stalked away, phone already in hand. By midday, the fallout was spreading. A family birthday party had to be canceled. The weekend fishing tournament was postponed indefinitely. One neighbor with a visiting son from out of state cursed loud enough to echo across the water. And the question started. Why was the marina shut down? What safety issues? Who approved this? When my name came up, I didn't hide. I explained to anyone who asked that the inspection was county approved, necessary for safety, and, here's the kicker, would ensure public access rights were protected. That last part stuck. Late that evening, I was locking on my toolbox when Mary walked down the dock. She didn't waste time. "You're going to war, aren't you?" "Looks that way." She nodded once. "Good. Just don't expect everyone to thank you for it." "I'm not doing it for thanks." Her gaze shifted toward the dark outline of Angela's house across the water. "Then do it right. And finish it." The second day of the inspection brought the county's own investigator to the docks. Clipboard, hard hat, measuring tape, the works. He took one look at the main walkway supports and shook his head. "These should have been replaced years ago," he muttered. "And the wiring on those dock lights? That's a fire waiting to happen." It was all I could do not to smile. Because now the shutdown wasn't just my doing, it was backed by the county's authority, stamped and signed in black ink. Angela had spent months dressing up her control as protecting property values. And in 48 hours, I'd reframed the entire story. She was the one presiding over a dangerous, possibly illegal facility. That night, I stood on my porch and looked out over the silent marina. The yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, bright under the dock lights. This was the midpoint, the line between waiting for their next move and making my own. I had 21 days left on their deadline, but it didn't matter anymore. Because by the time this was over, it wouldn't be my boat on trial. It would be Angela. The county inspector's report landed on my desk 4 days later, printed on crisp white paper with an official seal in the corner. It wasn't just bad for Angela, it was catastrophic. Electrical systems failing commercial code. Dock flotation units deteriorating past safety thresholds. Fire extinguishers outdated by 5 years. The final note was the one that mattered most. Facility is operating as a commercial marina without required permits, licenses, or insurance coverage. It wasn't written in bold, but it may as well have been. That line wasn't just a red flag. It was a lit match in a room full of gasoline. By noon, I made a dozen copies. Not anonymous pamphlets, not whispered rumors. Copies slid directly into the hands of neighbors at their mailboxes, into the folders of board members, and into the envelope addressed to the county clerk. I didn't need to embellish. The report spoke for itself. Angela struck back the next morning. She didn't come in person this time. She sent a letter on law firm stationery. Cease and desist. Claims of defamation, harassment, interference with HOA operations. Threats of civil liability for damages caused by your reckless and malicious actions. What caught my eye wasn't the bluster. It was what wasn't there. Nowhere in the 4 pages did they deny the contents of the inspector's report. Not once did they address the fact that Coastal Properties was unlicensed, uninsured, and operating in violation of zoning. It was pure theater, legal smoke to hide the fire. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and slid it into a drawer. That evening, my phone rang. The number was local, but not one I knew. "Is this Mr. Harris?" The voice was low, almost hesitant. "Speaking. This is Bob Miller. I own a property over in Pine Cove Estates." I knew the name. Pine Cove was one of the other communities where Coastal Properties held recreational property. "I've been following what's happening over there," Bob continued. "We went through the same thing. New rules. Sudden fees. Then they rescued our clubhouse when the HOA said it couldn't afford repairs. Bought it cheap. Now we rent it back from them at triple the cost." The line went quiet for a moment, and then, "If you're planning to take this public, I'll talk. I've got documents." I jotted down his number and felt the net tighten. Angela wasn't just a local problem. She was running a franchise. The pressure inside Lakeside Estates was shifting. Mary told me at the post boxes that people were starting to talk openly about audits, about Angela's resignation, about refunds for years of Marina fees. I could feel the undercurrent moving, but it wasn't all in my favor. The loyalists were digging in too. A neighbor named Sandra cornered me outside the hardware store. "Why are you trying to destroy this community?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Angela has done nothing but protect our property values. All you're doing is making us look like fools in the press." "I'm not the one making us look like fools," I said quietly. "The truth is." Her eyes went glassy, and for a second I thought she might cry. Instead, she turned sharply and walked away, muttering something about outsiders who don't understand. It was a reminder. For some people, truth doesn't matter if it threatens the comfort of their illusions. 3 days later, I got my first taste of real retaliation. I came home from a supply run to find a county code enforcement officer standing in my driveway. "Got a complaint about your shed," he said, flipping through his clipboard. "Allegedly not up to setback requirements." It was laughable. The shed had been there for 10 years, approved in writing by the HOA long before Angela arrived. But I knew what it was. When you can't win the argument, you go after the person. The officer did his inspection, took some measurements, and left. I didn't bother to get angry. Every petty move like this just added to the paper trail. That night, I sat on my porch, the harmony visible in the glow of the dock lights. The weight of it all pressed in. The risk of losing, the possibility of getting buried under legal fees, the reality that this was consuming my life. Part of me wanted to cut the lines, take her to another marina, and end the fight. But then I thought about Bob from Pine Cove, about the neighbors here who had been paying into a marina they didn't own, about the easement I'd found in those blueprints, the one no one had cared to mention for 30 years. No, the fight wasn't just about me anymore. The board meeting was set for Thursday. Angela must have thought the timing would favor her. Mid-afternoon on a workday, fewer residents able to attend. But word had spread too far. By the time I walked into the community center, every folding chair was full, and people were lining the walls. Angela was already at the head table, flanked by her loyalists. She wore a crisp white blouse, gold earrings, and that same poised smile I'd seen the first day she confronted me at the marina. The agenda was printed and stacked on the back table. Item 3, discussion of boat slip violations. When they reached it, Angela cleared her throat and began, "It has come to our attention that certain residents have chosen to disregard community requests for cooperation." Requests, I said loudly enough for the room to hear, that aren't backed by any written rule or legal authority. A ripple moved through the crowd. Angela's eyes locked on mine. "Mr. Harris, you've made serious accusations, not accusations," I said, holding up a stapled packet. County inspection report. Ownership records. Public access easement recorded in 1992. And, if anyone's curious, 3 other communities where the exact same scheme is played out. There was a long, heavy silence. One of the board members, Jim, the accountant, shifted in his seat. "Is that true, Angela?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. That was the first moment I thought she might actually lose. After the meeting, people crowded me in the parking lot. Some were angry, some grateful, most just stunned. Mary appeared at my side, her hand gripping my elbow. "She's going to come at you harder now," she said. I nodded. "Let her. The more she fights, the more she shows her hand." But later, in the quiet of my living room, I couldn't ignore the tension in my chest. The next move could end this, or blow it wide open in ways I couldn't control. And something told me Angela had no intention of going quietly. The air inside the community center felt thick enough to cut. It wasn't just the heat from 100 bodies packed into a room meant for half that number. It was the hum, that low, charge current that runs through a crowd before something breaks. Angela sat at the center of the board table, hands clasped, a stack of papers in front of her like props in a play she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. Her earrings caught the fluorescent light, winking like little shields. I had my own stack, thicker, heavier, and less polished. The county report, the Marina ownership documents, the public access easement from 1992, and a fresh edition, a notarized statement from Bob Miller and Pine Cove Estates, detailing the exact same rescue and rent-back scam. The meeting was standing room only. People leaned against the walls, sat cross-legged on the floor, peered through the open double doors. Even the back deck was crowded with those who couldn't squeeze in. Angela opened with charm. "We've all seen the rumors," she said smoothly, her voice amplified just enough to rise above the low murmur. "And I want to assure you, our board has always acted in the best interests of this community." The loyalists in the front row nodded on cue. She continued, "Mr. Harris has made some serious claims. Before we go further, I'd like to invite him to present his evidence so we can address it here, openly and transparently." Her invitation was a trap, an attempt to paint me as a conspiracy theorist in front of my neighbors. But it was a trap I'd been walking toward for weeks. I stood, papers in hand, and stepped forward. "I'll start simple," I said. "The Marina, the one we've all been paying to maintain, is not owned by the HOA. It's owned by Coastal Properties, LLC, which was incorporated 2 years ago. The sole listed owner is Hannah Brooks, Angela's daughter." The reaction was immediate, a ripple of whispers, sharp enough to make Angela's jaw tighten. "Second," I continued, "the county inspection conducted last week found multiple safety violations, faulty wiring, deteriorating flotation systems, outdated fire equipment. The marina was being operated as a commercial business without the permits, licenses, or insurance required by law." I held up the report. "This isn't my opinion. This is the county's." A hand shot up in the back. "So all those dues we paid for repairs went to maintain a property the HOA doesn't own?" I finished. "A property that, by recorded easement in 1992, the community already has a legal right to access without restriction or added fees." Angela leaned forward, voice sharp now. "Mr. Harris, this is a gross misrepresentation." "Then deny it," I said. "Deny that Coastal Properties is your daughter's company. Deny that you've collected marina fees while directing contracts to a business she owns. Deny that you've used this same playbook in other communities." Her silence was louder than any answer. I stepped closer to the table and set down the notarized statement from Bob Miller. "Pine Cove Estates. Same story. You pushed rules that made their clubhouse non-compliant, bought it cheap, then rented it back to them at triple the cost. And now you're trying it here." The room went still, the kind of stillness that means a verdict is already forming in the air. One of the board members, Jim Patterson, cleared his throat. "Angela, is any of this true?" She opened her mouth, but what came out wasn't an answer. It was anger. "This is character assassination," she snapped. "These are half-truths twisted to suit a personal vendetta. I have given this community years of service that paid your family." Mary called from the side of the room, her voice cutting clean through the noise. It was the first open challenge from someone other than me, and it hit like a crack in glass. People began talking over each other. Questions, accusations, demands. The loyalists in the front row stopped nodding. Angela slammed her palm on the table. "Order. This is still my meeting, no," Jim said quietly, but into the microphone. "It's the community's meeting." He turned to face the crowd. "I move for a vote of no confidence in the president." For a second, the room was nothing but heartbeats and shallow breathing. Then hands went up. Not a few, not a majority at first, but wave after wave until the air felt electric. I didn't raise mine. I didn't need to. When they counted, it wasn't even close. Angela stood slowly, gathering her papers with the precision of someone refusing to be rushed. But her eyes, the careful control was gone. "You think this is over?" she said, scanning the crowd. "You have no idea what you've started." She looked at me last, holding the stare just long enough for the room to feel it. Then she walked out, heels clicking like gunshots against the floor. The rest of the meeting was a blur. Motions for an independent audit, calls for refunds, volunteers stepping forward to form a transitional board. I stepped outside into the humid night air, the noise of the meeting muffled behind me. Across the parking lot, under the dim streetlight, I saw Angela's car. She was sitting in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel, watching the door. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she started the engine, pulled out slowly, and disappeared into the dark. Back home, I poured a drink and sat by the window. The Harmony was out there, floating in the moonlight, oblivious to the fact that her slip had just become ground zero for a war. I'd won tonight, or at least landed the blow that would drop Angela from her perch. But her parting words echoed in my head. "You think this is over?" No, this was just the part where the facade shattered in front of everyone. The real dismantling, the legal, financial, public dismantling was still ahead. And I had no illusions about how ugly that would get. The days after the vote felt strangely quiet. No more late-night letters. No more photographers skulking around the marina like ghosts with long lenses. Just the soft lap of water against the pilings, the metallic rattle of halyards, the ordinary sounds of life on the lake returning. But underneath, the current was moving fast. Within a week, the interim board announced an independent audit of HOA finances. The county expanded their investigation from safety concerns to possible fraud. And Angela, once the immovable center of every meeting, every rule, every confrontation, stopped showing her face in the neighborhood altogether. It was as if she'd been erased, except for the damage she left behind. I stayed out of the spotlight as much as I could. I'd done my part. The community had to finish the job. But every now and then, I'd get updates from Mary. They found over $68,000 in Marina fees collected over 2 years, she told me one morning at the post boxes. And the board can't explain where it went. Not on paper, anyway. I just nodded. It'll come out. And it did. Piece by piece, like old rope unraveling, the story spilled into public record. Coastal Properties wasn't just an investment venture. It was a siphon. Money in the form of fees, maintenance costs, and aesthetic compliance penalties had flowed into Hannah's accounts, dressed up in contracts that looked legitimate until you read the fine print. By the second month, state investigators had joined in. What started as a boat dispute was now a case file thick enough to crack a table. The personal blows came quietly. Angela's house went up for sale, fast at a loss. The moving truck showed up on a Tuesday morning, and by that afternoon the curtains were gone, the blinds drawn. Hannah's name started vanishing from property records across the county, one asset at a time, as investigators froze accounts and seized holdings pending restitution claims. It wasn't triumph I felt. Not exactly. More like watching a storm I'd been bracing for finally break apart into scattered rain. The marina itself changed hands again, but this time the transfer wasn't done in shadows. The community bought it back, legally and openly, with terms that locked out any private takeover for the next 50 years. Every household got a vote on the new bylaws. The easement was not only preserved but posted at every entrance. Public access guaranteed by easement. Lake Harmony, 1992. I volunteered as an advisor during the transition, not to control anything, but to make sure no one ever forgot how easily control could be taken. Life slid back towards something like normal, though normal was never going to mean the same thing again. Some neighbors still avoided me, maybe out of loyalty to Angela, maybe because I'd been the one to drag the fight into the open. But others, the quiet ones who'd stood on the sidelines before, started nodding or stopping to chat. One evening, as the sun bled gold into the lake, Jim from the old board walked down to my slip. He looked older than I remembered, but lighter somehow. "You could have buried me with her," he said. "You didn't. I won't forget that." I shrugged. "You weren't the one pulling the strings." "Maybe not," he said, "but I didn't cut them either." He walked away without waiting for a reply. Months later, when the final restitution agreements were announced, they barely made the front page. By then, people had moved on to the next outrage, the next headline. But for those of us who lived here, the settlement numbers were more than ink on paper. They were proof. The state seized 3 of Hannah's properties and liquidated them to repay the communities she and Angela had drained. Angela herself avoided prison by pleading out to reduce charges, but she'd never serve on any board, HOA or otherwise, again. And in Lakeside Estates, the Marina wasn't a bargaining chip anymore. It was a gathering place again. On the first Saturday of spring, we held the inaugural Lake Harmony fishing tournament. Not the glossy, rule-bound version Angela would have insisted on, but the kind where kids tangled their lines and nobody cared. Mary brought pies. Someone's grandkid played guitar on the deck. From my slip, I watched the dock sway under the weight of neighbors laughing together again. For the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like a battlefield. Later that evening, when the last boat came in and the water calmed, I sat on the Harmony with a beer in hand. The sun was gone, leaving a ribbon of orange fading to deep blue across the horizon. The air was still enough to hear a single heron call from the far shore. I thought about everything it had taken to get here, the letters, the meetings, the stares, the votes. The nights I'd almost backed down. The mornings I'd woken up knowing it would be easier if I did. Somewhere in the distance, a car slowed on the road that curved past the marina. My eyes followed it automatically. For a moment, in the fading light, I thought I saw a familiar profile behind the wheel. But the car didn't stop, and the moment was gone. People mistake quiet for weakness. They mistake patience for submission. But quiet is where you hear the small sounds, the ones that tell you where the rod is, how deep it runs. Patience is how you wait long enough for the current to shift, so that when you move with the force of the whole lake behind you. Angela learned that the hard way. The moon rose full over Lake Harmony, scattering silver light across the water. I reached down, ran my hand along the worn wood of the dock, and felt the hum of it. Not tension now, but something steadier. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't have to be. Sometimes it's just the sound of the water clearing after the storm, and the knowledge that what's anchored will hold.